Hey, what's up everyone? EJK here, and I got a couple requests about the Fantasy versus Marine King Prime game from, there we go, from Pro League, and so I'm gonna do a video about the build that Marine King Prime does. Now, I just watched the video of this game, so it's fresh in my mind, and right off the top, I'm gonna say that the build Marine King Prime does relies a lot on mobility, and uh, it also utilizes, yeah, the key word here is mobility. He has a very low siege tank count, and that's because siege tanks are more immobile units, and the only time he ever sieges up the siege tanks are when he does a doom drop. The doom drops also use the immobility of siege tanks that Fantasy was making, and uses the mobility that Marine King Prime's huge medvac army has as well. And lastly, the very fast upgrades allows Marine King Prime to have an upgrade advantage so that when he is fighting, he gets the most cost efficiency out of his units. Fantasy in this game, he made a couple crucial mistakes, such as not having. I was pretty surprised he didn't have a sensor tower in his main base. He only had one siege tank, and the rest of his units were at the natural. So he wasn't prepared for Doom Drop by any means, and that kind of struck me as offsetting, especially since I guess it was because he was on two bases. Both players went up to 5 barracks, 1 factory, and 1 starport before taking the third CCs. But since Marine King Prime had his early medvacs out, whereas Fantasy's medvacs were delayed, Marine King Prime had map control, and so that also put him in an aggressive stance to do doom drops. And I guess, yeah, I guess pretty much the two keywords, not just the one keyword, is mobility and doom drops. That's how you're gonna win with this style if you do choose to copy this build from this video, the build done by Marine King Prime. So he's opening up pretty similarly, making one Reaper, making a reactor, and then making an engineering bay. Right off the bat, I don't really like how he scouts with the single Reaper. I would have preferred him to at least send an SCV to the other's base, because scouting with the Reaper itself is very risky per se. He shouldn't have lost it there. But if the other player does do a 2-racks Reaper opening and you don't scout it, and your Reaper pops up and he sees like another Reaper and then a second Reaper pops out, then you kind of get screwed and you're in full retreat mode. And it becomes, I guess, like, you can pull SCVs, but it's slightly more risky play than if you just send an SCV to scout. But at the same time, it gives you an economic advantage. So I guess it's okay. But on more than 2-player maps where you don't know the location of your opponent, I really prefer sending the SCV to the other side, just so you can also get the scout fast enough. Because Marine King Prime right now, he knows absolutely nothing that's going on. He's playing in the dark. And if Fantasy had gone for Banshee-based play, and he's sending a second SCV out because his first SCV was denied by the Reaper, if the first SCV had made it towards the base, he would have seen the natural command center go down, because Marine King Prime only made one Reaper and then a reactor. So, and then he would have, like, Fantasy's getting the Raven because he doesn't know what Marine King Prime is doing. But if Fantasy had gotten Cloak Banshees, it would have done a considerable amount of damage, because Marine King Prime is both delaying stim and he wouldn't have any Vikings out to deal with the Banshee, and you can just kind of find sweet spots around the turret vision and pick off workers and pick off units. Of course, it would be much more difficult with combat shields because it takes 3 shots to kill Marines, but it would still it would set Marine King Prime behind a lot more than the opening that Fantasy's doing right now, which is a much more defensive opening. So we see here Marine King Prime, he's going into a 2-racks build. His first item is combat shields. I'm pretty sure that's for any early type game pushes, and Cloak Banshees as well, because if Fantasy had chosen to do a fast siege tank marine attack, then having combat shields would finish before stim, and would also allow the marines to survive longer, and since they have their +1 attack already, they would do more damage. So you don't necessarily need stim to out DPS your opponent. And we see here Marine King Prime going for a very fast starport, because the objective of his build is to get a big medvac count as well. Fantasy scanning, he sees exactly what Marine King Prime's doing. He most likely should have checked the upgrades too, but I don't think he put 2 and 2 together during the game. It's very hard to do that. Pretty much only Flash is good at doing that, and even then he doesn't do it all the time. So I would say this build is good to use in a best of X situation, not necessarily to take as your standard gameplay, because after Fantasy watches the replay and kind of sees what Marine King Prime did, he'll be better equipped to stop it and shut it down. And if Fantasy can survive towards past like 15 minutes and get on 3 bases and develop a large siege tank count, then it really makes Marine King Prime's army a lot squishier. And if you're down in siege tank count, you basically cannot hold any ground, and the siege tanks kind of just bully you towards a base, and so you have to really rely on guerrilla warfare and mobility to really abuse the siege tanks, and that doesn't work with a turret ring and some defense left in the main. So the first drop, I don't like Marine King Prime boosting it right here. If he poked in, he did poke in, like he boosted right over here where the first medevac is. He would have seen that Fantasy has no vision of that base, so he could have unloaded all of his units safely and then stimmed forward. Fantasy, though, has a well-positioned or a good base layout. His siege tank, it cannot easily be sniped. It's guarding all of the important add-ons. The only thing about this is that these depots are exposed, and Marine King Prime is able to get them. He's able to supply block Fantasy heavily, and although that's not game-crippling damage, it is enough to justify this drop based on the damage that it does. In this drop, it also does not have stim either. So, oh yeah, actually it doesn't have stim, so I actually think it was good on Marine King Prime to boost the medevacs, because it's good to drop your units over there if you don't or if you already have stim, so then you can kind of stim forward. But if you don't have stim, you can get your Nah, actually, it can go either way. Basically, though, he didn't have stim, and that prevented him from being able to attack into Fantasy's bio army, because Marine King Prime's now up 2 upgrades, whereas Fantasy's only starting 1. Now, Marine King Prime also gets a bit fortunate here because of the build that Fantasy's doing as well. He's really neglecting his upgrades. He's just started +1 is halfway done 11 minutes into the game, and for any matchup for Terran, that's not a good thing. And what some players do is when they go Marine Tank, when their +1's about 50% done, they'll add an armory and a second engineering bay. So then they'll start 2-1 at the same time. And so you would only be down 1 upgrade, whereas here in this situation, Fantasy would be down 2 upgrades. And that gives you a big enough lead so that you can trade really, really well against his army, especially smaller types of units such as Marines and Zerglings. They benefit more from upgrades, and also Marines have a lot more DPS as well, so they're utilizing the upgrade advantage a lot faster than other units such as Blink Stalkers and Zealots. So we see here, Marine King Prime and Fantasy, they're both adding 2 more barracks before they expand. The reason being is because this map is very easy to do a lot of drops in. Fantasy showing that doing multiple prong drops. There's one over there next to the third, and there's another here going into the natural. And if you take a fast third base, there's no way you can stay alive against these kinds of small little drop plays. They'll basically pick you apart, and you'll lose too much damage, so the third command center won't be justified. And this is a pretty big fleet by Marine King Prime, and if Fantasy had a third base, then he most likely wouldn't have had a big enough army to survive against it, but Fantasy did go for fast stim. So both players are doing good playing the map in the right way. Let me just check. Okay, good, it's recording. It's recording, it's all good. Sometimes I get a bad feeling that it's not recording. because I really don't like to do them over again, so I just like to double check and make sure. Fantasy showing his excellent multitasking, killing off, I believe, 2 SCVs and delaying the 3rd command center even more. So right now he's in a fantastic position. Oh, so let's pause the game right here because the units tab is open and just take a look at their units. Fantasy is up 7 workers. It's mostly because of these small guerrilla hit squads of Marines doing small bits of damage, picking off SCVs here and there, but it does add up as we see in the units production tab. Marine King Prime has 3 more medvacs than Fantasy. He should have 4, but 1 died full of units in Fantasy's main base. So if you don't lose that, you should be up by 4 medvacs. I would consider Fantasy's medvac count the standard because you normally get siege tanks and you delay the medvac count. But Marine King Prime got medvacs before the siege tanks, so that's why his medvac count is significantly higher. That allows him to do more doom drops and either do faster doom drops or do more powerful doom drops. Whereas Fantasy could do a doom drop with 4, Marine King Prime could do a doom drop with 8, and that's another reason why. Oh, and then so the siege tank count, it's 2 versus 5. Fantasy does, in a straight out engagement, Fantasy would win because of a siege tank count, but because Marine King Prime's strategy is based on mobility, part of him being able to do significant amount of damage is by making sure that he's only engaging versus a couple siege tanks at a time, and basically having Fantasy's siege tanks out of position so that Marine King's almost twice the bio size of Fantasy's with a 2 upgrade advantage can do a lot of damage. Huh, that kind of rhymed. So scans going down from both players. Marine King Prime, he does a fake stim up so that Fantasy sieges 1, 2. There's 2 tanks there, and then he has a 3rd one ready to be sieged. And Fantasy needs to have these siege tanks over here as well. Otherwise, Marine King Prime can just charge up the ramp, and a bunker and 20 submarines isn't gonna survive against Marines with 2-2 versus Marines with 1-0. Fantasy only has +1 attack too right now, so he's really gonna be relying on the siege tank counts and superior positioning to keep himself alive. And Marine King Prime immediately goes towards the main. And right here, we see there's only 2 siege tanks, so already Marine King Prime has circumvented 3 of Fantasy's siege tanks, and therefore has has basically avoided the brunt of Fantasy's big army. So by doing this drop into the main base, and also Marine King Prime's 2-2, Fantasy's 1-0 right now. So this is what a battle looks like when Fantasy is down 3 upgrades. You don't want to be down 3 upgrades in any engagement because it makes a significant difference, and it's like when a Protoss goes double forge and you only have 1 eBay and they're at like 2-2 when you're at like 1-0. Zealots are impossible to kill. And as we see here, Fantasy's entire arming is just melting because of the 2 upgrade advantage, and Fantasy didn't have his siege tanks as well, or they weren't sieged up. They were fighting, but they weren't sieged up. And he also had a big portion of his army over here, way out of position. So Marine King essentially got a really, really good positioning on Fantasy's army and was able to kind of fight only against half of Fantasy's army versus 100% of Marine King's army, and that's why he was able to take the engagement so well. And also having the early upgrade advantage helps him out a lot in these kinds of engagements too, so that Marine King Prime's 100% army versus Fantasy's 50%, and then you add on the 2 upgrade advantage that Marine King Prime has, makes Marine King Prime's army basically as powerful as it can be. And now we see here Fantasy pulling his SCVs. The Marines are not going to die because they're at 2-2. SCVs aren't even going to scratch the Marines' combat shields. And GG is going to be called shortly. So that's kind of a quicker VOD. To overline the basic build, Marine King Prime goes for a fast eBay to get an upgrade advantage. And he utilizes both a bit better upgrade advantage, a smaller siege tank count, and a smaller siege tank count for faster medvacs, and just a stronger bioforce. So basically having a stronger army to pick off part of Fantasy's army and catch him out of position. The goal with this build is not to fight the other Terran player's army head on. It's to find a small chunk of it, like 50%, and to kill that part, and then things will just spiral out of control from there. So, hope you guys enjoyed the video. Don't forget to subscribe on the bottom, and you can find a list of all my other videos. I have them archived in a Team Liquid thread. You can also find that at the bottom too. And if you have any other videos that you want me to go over, then just leave a comment and I will get to it as soon as possible. Currently, for the next videos that I'm going to do, there's a couple from Take TV or from Home Story Cup that I want to go over, and then I have about 20 or 30 games from Pro League that I have to watch, and I'll most likely be doing a couple games from there as well. And then there's also the Shoutcraft Invitational. There's so many Flash games, I don't even know. There's no way I'm going to be able to do every single one of them, so I'm just going to have to pick and choose the best games to do them. So yeah, I'm pretty booked right now, but if you guys have any comments, I'll try to prioritize those about which videos to do first over the others. And yeah, so alright, signing off. Cheers.